Emoton was a trader who sold her wares at the exact point where her statue now stands. She was historically credited with setting up the first primary school in the kingdom and saving the monarchy during one of its lowest moments. She helped the Oba Uware in reclaiming the throne from his usurper brother, Oba Uwafeakin, who reigned about 1432 AD. Queen Iden is yet another heroine whose sacrifice helped shape the Benin kingdom. She was the queen during the reign of Oba Upape in about 1700 AD. She is known to have volunteered herself as a sacrificial lamb for the welfare of her husband and that of the entire kingdom after she consulted the oracle and was informed that human sacrifice would be needed to appease the gods and restore peace and unity in the kingdom. Assaurro. Assaurro, also known as General Assaurro, was a war chief in the Kingdom of Benin who served as the sword-bearer to Oba Ovenramwin during the 1897 British expedition to Benin. He participated in the defense of Benin against the British expeditionary force that aimed to capture the Oba. Assaurro's statement that no other person should pass this road except the Oba, Sokpan Oba, resulted in a road in Benin being named Sikpanba. General Assaurro was from Igwogo, located in the present-day Ovia Northeast local government area of Edo State. In January 1897, during a religious festival, a British expedition led by acting James Robert Phillips attempted to enter Benin without Oba Ovenramwin's permission. Assaurro and other warriors resisted the British officials, forcing them to retreat and killing some of them. This incident heightened tensions between the British and Benin. The British officials claimed they wanted to discuss trade issues, but their unauthorized entry and the subsequent violence led to further conflicts. After the British defeated the Benin Empire and captured Oba, King Ovenramwin, Assaurro refused to accept the exile order. During the British attack on Benin led by James Robert Phillips, Assaurro protected the road used by the British force, declaring that only the Oba could use that road, which was later named Sikpanba. A statue of General Assaurro stands on this road in Benin City to honor his actions. General Assaurro the warrior was the sword-bearer to King Ovenramwin, the Oba of Benin, in 1897. He participated in the defense of Benin during the 1897 expedition, engaging the British expeditionary force sent to capture the Oba. A quote uttered by the general that no other person should dare pass this road except the Oba, Sokpan Oba, was later translated to Sikpanba, which a well-known road in Benin was named after. Chief Obasagi was not just an outstanding Benin warrior of old who defended the kingdom against external invasion, but also a talented blacksmith and sculptor. Human sacrifice. Many 19th-century reports by European travelers and colonizers emphasized the practice of juju, human sacrifice, in Benin, and these have colored later scholarly works on the kingdom. From the early days, human sacrifices were a part of the state religion. But many of the accounts of the sacrifices, says historian J. D. Graham, are exaggerated or based on rumor and speculation. He says that all of the evidence points to a limited, ritual custom of human sacrifice. Many of the written accounts referring to the human sacrifices describe them as actually being executed criminals. 41 female skeletons thrown into a pit were discovered by the archaeologist Graham Khanna in the 1960s. He interpreted these findings as showing that human sacrifice or execution of criminals took place in Benin in the 13th century AD. The skeletons show no signs of violence, however, and may instead be a mass grave from a bubonic plague outbreak. Edo historian Professor Philip Igbafe states that in pre-colonial Benin, the tradition was that only slaves could be sacrificed. This could include hardened criminals and those who had committed serious crimes, who would either be executed or sold into slavery. Sacrifices were made at the anniversary of the Oba's father, at the annual bead ceremony, and to propitiate the gods when poor weather threatened crops or when an epidemic threatened. In addition, the threat of a major calamity or national disaster was also an occasion for sacrifices. Humans were sacrificed in an annual ritual in honor of the god of iron, where warriors from Benin City would perform an acrobatic dance while suspended from the trees. The ritual recalled a mythical war against the sky. Sacrifices of a man, a woman, a goat, a cow, and a ram were also made to a god called the King of Death. The god, named Ojuwu, was worshipped at a special altar in the center of Benin City. There were two separate annual series of rites that honored past Obas. Sacrifices were performed every fifth day. At the end of each series of rites, the current Oba's deceased father was honored with a public festival. During the festival, 12 criminals, chosen from a prison where the worst criminals were held, were sacrificed. By the end of the 18th century, 3 to 4 people were sacrificed at the mouth of the Benin River annually to attract European trade, according to one source. Burials. The monarchy of Benin was hereditary. The eldest son was to become the new Oba. In order to validate the succession of the kingship, the eldest son had to bury his father and perform elaborate rituals. If the eldest son failed to complete these tasks, he might be disqualified from becoming king. Separation of son and mother. After the son was installed as king, his mother, after having been invested with the title of Ioba, was transferred to a palace just outside Benin City, in a place called Usalu. The mother held a considerable amount of power. She was, however, never allowed to meet her son, who was now a divine ruler again. Divinity of the Oba. In Benin, the Oba was seen as divine. The Oba's divinity and sacredness was the focal point of the kingship. The Oba was shrouded in mystery. He only left his palace on ceremonial occasions. It was previously punishable by death to assert that the Oba performed human acts, such as eating, sleeping, dying, or washing. The Oba was also credited with having magical powers. He also controlled a powerful bureaucratic apparatus whose decrees obeyed to the letter. Architecture. The impluvium was used in Benin architecture to store rainwater. Among the residences of the nobility, a compluvium channeled the rainwater into the impluvium in order to permit light and air through the walls since windows were absent among these structures. The stored rainwater in the impluvium was discharged out of the house through a drainage system beneath the floor. Archaeological works from the mid-20th century have revealed the existence of edge-laid potsherd pavements in Benin City, dated around or prior to the 14th century. The walls of Benin are a series of earthworks made up of banks and ditches, called Aya in the Edo language in the area around present-day Benin City, the capital of present-day Edo, Nigeria. They consist of 15 kilometers, 9.3 miles, of city Aya and an estimated 16,000 kilometers, 9,900 miles, in the rural area around Benin. Some estimates suggest that the walls of Benin may have been constructed between the 13th and mid-15th century CE, and others suggest that the walls of Benin, in the Ezen region, may have been constructed during the first millennium AD. City walls. The Benin Moat, Edo, Iannuo, also known as the Benin Aya, or Walls of Benin, are a series of massive earthworks encircling Benin City in Nigeria's Edo state. These moats have deep historical roots, with evidence suggesting their existence before the establishment of the Oba monarchy. Construction began around 800 AD and continued until 1460 AD, involving large-scale manual labor and the repurposing of earth from the inner ditch to build the outer berm. Some traditional sources claim that these earthworks spanned approximately 16,000 kilometers, 9,900 miles, enclosing about 6,500 square kilometers, 2,500 square miles, of land, but very little remains today. The Benin moats served as defensive structures, with steep banks and a berm to deter invaders. Access to the city was controlled through 9 gates. Today, remnants of the moats can still be found in Benin City, although urbanization and land disputes pose challenges to their preservation. Recognized for their historical significance, the Benin Moat was added as an extension to the existing World Heritage Site of the Royal Palaces of Abumi in 1995, though still awaiting official recognition by UNESCO, and was acknowledged by the Guinness Book of World Records in 1974 as one of the world's largest man-made structures by length, second only to China's Great Wall. It was described by Alfred Dapper in his book Description of Africa in 1668 as the Great Walls of Benin. The Benin City walls have been known to Westerners since around 1500. Around 1500, the Portuguese explorer Duarte Pacheco Pereira briefly described the walls during his travels. In Pereira's Esmeralda de Situ Orbis, 1505, we read, "The houses are built of sun-dried bricks covered with palm leaves." Benin, which is 80 leagues long by 40 leagues broad, is always at war with its neighbors from whom it obtains captives, whom we buy at from 12 to 15 brass or copper manillas. Another description given around 1600 100 years after Pereira's description, is by the Dutch explorer Dirk Reuters. Pereira's account of the walls is as follows. This city is about a league long from gate to gate. It has no wall, but is surrounded by a large moat, very wide and deep, which suffices for its defense. The archaeologist Graham Kana suggests that Pereira was probably mistaken with his description by saying that there was no wall. Kana says, Pereira considered that a bank of earth was not a wall in the sense of the Europe of his day. Reuters' account of the walls is as follows. At the gate where I entered on horseback, I saw a very high bulwark, very thick of earth, with a very deep broad ditch, but it was dry and full of high trees. That gate is a reasonably good gate, made of wood in their manner, which is to be shut, and there is always a watchholder. Benin, in 1897. Estimates for the initial construction of the walls range from the first millennium to the mid-15th century. According to Kana, oral tradition and travelers' accounts suggest a construction date of 1450 to 1500. It has been estimated that assuming a 10-hour workday, a labor force of 5,000 men could have completed the walls within 97 days, or by 2,421 men in 200 days. However, these estimates have been criticized for not taking into account the time it would have taken to extract the earth from an ever-deepening hole and the time it would have taken to heap the earth into a high bank. It is unknown whether slavery or some other type of labor was used in the construction of the walls. The walls were built of a ditch and dike structure. The ditch dug to form an inner moat with the excavated earth used to form the exterior rampart. The Benin walls were partially demolished by the British in 1897 during their 1897 Punitive Expedition. Scattered pieces of the structure remain in Edo, with the vast majority of them being used by the locals for building purposes. What remains of the wall itself continues to be torn down for real estate developments in Nigeria. Fred Pierce wrote in New Scientist. They extend for some 16,000 kilometers in all, in a mosaic of more than 500 interconnected settlement boundaries. They cover 2,510 square miles, 6,500 square kilometers, and were all dug by the Edo people. In all, they are 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China and consumed 100 times more material than the Great Pyramid of Cheops. They took an estimated 150 million hours of digging to construct and are perhaps the largest single archaeological phenomenon on the planet. Ethnomathematician Ron Eglash has discussed the plan layout of the city using fractals as the basis, not only in the city itself and the villages, but even in the rooms of houses. He commented that, when Europeans first came to Africa, they considered the architecture very disorganized and thus primitive. It never occurred to them that the Africans might have been using a form of mathematics that they hadn't even discovered yet. Military operations relied on a well-trained, disciplined force. At the head of the host stood the Obas of Benin. The monarch of the realm served as supreme military commander. Beneath him were subordinate generalissimos, the Izomo, the Ias, and others who supervised a metropolitan regiment based in the capital and a royal regiment made up of hand-picked warriors that also served as bodyguards. Benin's queen mother, the Ioba, also retained her own regiment, the Queen's Own. The metropolitan and royal regiments were relatively stable semi-permanent or permanent formations. The village regiments provided the bulk of the fighting force and were mobilized as needed, sending contingents of warriors upon the command of the king and his generals. Formations were broken down into subunits under designated commanders. Foreign observers often commented favorably on Benin's discipline and organization as better disciplined than any other Guinea nation, contrasting them with the slacker troops from the Gold Coast. Until the introduction of guns in the 15th century, traditional weapons like the spear, short sword, and bow held sway. Efforts were made to reorganize a local guild of blacksmiths in the 18th century to manufacture light firearms, but dependence on imports was still heavy. Before the coming of the gun, guilds of blacksmiths were charged with war production, particularly swords and iron spearheads. In addition, crossbowmen formed a specialized unit of the Benin army. Archers and crossbowmen were trained in target and field archery. In 1514 or 1516, the Obas of Benin seized a Portuguese bombard for use. Benin's tactics were well organized, with preliminary plans weighed by the Obas and his subcommanders. Logistics were organized to support missions from the usual porter forces, water transport via canoe, and requisitioning from localities the army passed through. Movement of troops via canoes was critically important in the lagoons, creeks, and rivers of the Niger Delta, a key area of Benin's domination. Tactics in the field seem to have evolved over time. While the head-on clash was well known, documentation from the 18th century shows greater emphasis on avoiding continuous battle lines and more effort to encircle an enemy, Ifeanyiako. Fortifications were important in the region, and numerous military campaigns fought by Benin's soldiers revolved around sieges. Benin's military earthworks are the largest of such structures in the world, and Benin's rivals also built extensively. Barring a successful assault, most sieges were resolved by a strategy of attrition, slowly cutting off and starving out the enemy fortification until it capitulated. On occasion, however, European mercenaries were called on to aid with these sieges. In 1603-04, for example, European cannon helped batter and destroy the gates of a town near present-day Lagos, allowing 10,000 warriors of Benin to enter and conquer it. As payment, the Europeans received items, such as palm oil and bundles of pepper. The example of Benin shows the power of indigenous military systems, but also the role outside influences and new technologies brought to bear. This is a normal pattern among many nations. European contact. The first European travelers to reach Benin were Portuguese explorers under João Afonso de Aveiro in about 1485. A strong mercantile relationship developed, with the Edo trading slaves and tropical products such as ivory, pepper, and palm oil for European goods such as manillas and guns. In the early 16th century, the Obas sent an ambassador to Lisbon, and the King of Portugal sent Christian missionaries to Benin City. Some residents of Benin City could still speak Pidgin Portuguese in the late 19th century. The first English expedition to Benin was in 1553, and significant trading developed between Europe and Benin based on the export of ivory, palm oil, pepper, and later slaves. Visitors in the 16th and 19th centuries brought back to Europe tales of Great Benin, a fabulous city of noble buildings, ruled over by a powerful king. A fanciful engraving of the settlement was made by a Dutch illustrator and was shown in Alfred Dapper's Nakarij Beschrijving der Afrikaanse Geuzen, published in Amsterdam in 1668. The work states the following about the royal palace. The king's court is square and located on the right-hand side of the city, as one enters it through the gate of Gatan. It is about the same size as the city of Haarlem and entirely surrounded by a special wall, comparable to the one which encircles the town. It is divided into many magnificent palaces, houses, and apartments of the courtiers, and comprises beautiful and long squares with galleries, about as large as the Exchange at Amsterdam. The buildings are of different sizes, however, resting on wooden pillars, from top to bottom lined with copper casts, on which pictures of their war exploits and battles are engraved. All of them are being very well maintained. Most of the buildings within this court are covered with palm leaves, instead of with square planks, and every roof is adorned with a small spired tower, on which cast copper birds are standing, being very artfully sculpted and lifelike with their wings spread. Another Dutch traveler, David van Nyendel, visited Benin in 1699 and also wrote an account of the kingdom. Nyendel's description was published in 1704 as an appendix to Willem Bosman's Nakarij Beschrijving van de Guineas Goud Tand and Slavekust. In his description, Nyendel states the following about the character of the Benin people. The inhabitants of the Benin are in general a kind and polite people, of whom one with kindness might get everything he desires. Whatever might be offered to them out of politeness will always be doubled in return. However, they want their politeness to be returned with likewise courtesy as well, without the appearance of any disappointment or rudeness, and rightly so. To be sure, trying to take anything from them with force or violence would be as if one tries to reach out to the moon and will never be left unreckoned. When it comes to trade, they are very strict and will not suffer the slightest infringement of their customs. Not even an iota can be changed. Though, when one is willing to accept these customs, they are very easygoing and will cooperate in every way possible to reach an agreement. British trader James Pinnock, who visited the kingdom, writes that he saw a large number of men all handcuffed and chained, with their ears cut off with a razor. T.B. Ochterlony describes the approach to the capital through an avenue of trees hung with decomposing human remains. After the Lane of Horrors came a grass common, thickly strewn with the skulls and bones of sacrificed human beings. The historian James D. Graham, in his article The Slave Trade, Depopulation and Human Sacrifice in Benin History, 1965, has shown that the area where the skulls and bones of human beings were concentrated, called a Golgotha by a few European visitors, was actually a place where the bodies of dead and executed criminals were deposited, as noted by Captain H. L. Galway, who visited Benin in the 1890s. Galway in 1893 stated that the king is all-powerful, though he would appear to be somewhat in the hands of his big men and very much tied down by fetish customs. He also observed that the Golgotha was really the place where all criminals' bodies were deposited. Scientific analysis of the brass, or bronze, used to make the famous Benin plaques and other sculptures found that, beginning in the late 15th century, the metal, previously thought to have come from the Netherlands, began to derive from the Rhineland region of Germany. At that time, the brass was exported from Germany in the form of ring-shaped ingots, which were used as currency in the transatlantic slave trade, bought from the Portuguese and incorporated by the people in Benin as a metal source in sculpture, and subsequently melted down in Benin to produce Benin Bronzes. Imagine a city with walls longer than the Great Wall of China, a kingdom whose artists mastered metal so perfectly, their work stunned the most powerful empire on earth. And yet, this place was burned, looted, and almost erased from history. The Kingdom of Benin, Africa's lost empire. In the heart of what is now southern Nigeria, around the 11th century, a new power began to rise, the Kingdom of Benin. Led by kings known as Obas, this empire built a capital city so organized, it had streetlights fueled by palm oil, thriving markets, and advanced urban planning that put much of medieval Europe to shame. Surrounding the city were colossal earthworks, over 16,000 kilometers of walls and ditches, longer than the Great Wall of China, and built entirely by hand. But perhaps Benin's greatest achievement was its art. The famed Benin Bronzes, thousands of plaques, statues, and ceremonial pieces cast in brass and bronze, told the story of the kingdom's rulers, battles, and traditions. These weren't just decorations. They were history books in metal. They recorded the lineage of the Obas, the arrival of Portuguese traders, and the daily life of the kingdom, all with unmatched detail and skill. But in 1897, everything changed. After a clash between British officials and Benin forces, Britain launched what they called the Punitive Expedition. Thousands of soldiers marched on Benin City. The city was burned to the ground. The Oba was exiled, and over 4,000 of Benin's priceless bronzes were stolen, shipped to museums and private collections in Europe and America.